All right, here we go. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully everyone can see this. Thumbs up. Okay, excellent. My name is Jeff Nugent. I'm the mapping and GIS person at the Windham Regional Commission in Brattleboro, Vermont. And joining me today is Drew Pollock-Bruce, who's the founder and owner of CRO Planning and Design up in Burlington. So he's going to be presenting in the second half of today. Also have Lisa Donnelly. I need to acknowledge her. She is on the call as well. She's the person that actually puts out most of our counters and actually processes the data. So a lot of the data that you're looking at today, she's one responsible for collecting all that. And Anand Fideli, who works for WRC as well, is going to be on the call, just monitoring the chat. So let's get started. So 3 basic parts to the presentation today. I'm going to start with talking about the equipment that we use. This is not a how-to presentation for doing your own counts. That's a whole separate presentation. We can certainly give you information on that. But this is more, because a lot of towns are on the call here, and Windham Regional Commission does a lot of data collection for towns. So if you were asking us to do a count or you want to understand better how we do the counts, that's why we're talking about the equipment and the different site considerations we go through, so you know where we can and cannot do our counts. The second part of the presentation I'm going to talk about is how WRC actually collects the data, how we analyze it, and how we make it available to the public. So this will help you to better understand the data that we may provide you. And the third part, again, will be Drew talking about the economic analysis. So I'd like for folks to hold off their questions until the end, if that's possible, and also to mute yourself until the end when we have the question and answer period. So first, just very briefly, why do these counts? First of all, it just gives you a general idea of the use patterns on maybe the trail that you maintain or your downtown streets. So you can't say, oh yeah, a lot of people use our trail. You can actually provide actual numbers and actual data of who's using them, when they're using it. Just a quick example, the 2 bottom charts here below, we were passing those out, making those available during COVID. The West River Trail in Brattleboro, sure, it may be crowded in the middle of the day, but 8 o'clock in the morning, there's actually very few people out there. So you don't need to get up at the crack of dawn to get out and enjoy trails and make with an uncrowded feeling. The graph on the right, the Crosstown Trail in Dover, you can see the top hours from that are 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, but basically early morning and much of the afternoon, it can be pretty quiet on there. So you can get a good idea with these trail data of when people are using your trails. Give an idea of trends. Is it more people on your trails, more people walking your sidewalks downtown, about the same or fewer? We can use it to justify infrastructure investments. So a good example of this is the town of Wilmington recently got a grant to improve the Hoot Toot and Whistle Trail in town. And one of the grant questions, I think it was a recreational trails grant from the state, was how are you going to measure success on your project? And so we've been doing trail counts for a couple of years before construction, and we hope to do some trail counts afterwards, and we expect to see an increase in use after that. So you can justify the money you're spending on trail improvements. And then finally, you can do some great economic analysis, which again, Drew is going to talk about here in the second half of the presentation. So a bit about the equipment that we use. For our bicycle counts, we have tube counters. So they're rubber tubes that we put across a road or a trail. And we use those typically for short-term counts for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time. We have 3 different trail bicycle counters that we use. One is an eco counter, which counts just bicycles. And then we have 2 traffic counters by a company called JMAR, which collects traffic data as well as bicycles. So when we're doing a traffic count on a road that may have some bicycle traffic, we tend to use those so we get both a traffic count and a bike count. And the data that we get is broken down by the hour, and it also includes direction. A couple considerations on when we would not use the bicycle tube counter. We need to put it in a place that doesn't have a lot of stopped vehicles or parked cars. So we're not using the bike tube counters in downtown Brattleboro or downtown Bellows Falls. They simply don't work in a place like that. Heavy traffic can sometimes cause some damage to our tubes. We tried to put a counter out on Putney Road in Brattleboro in between the Common and the West River Bridge, and didn't fare very well due to the heavy truck traffic there, but also because the road was pretty rough. And so rough roads can be a problem too. This is an example of a rough road here. This is Route 121 at the Rockingham-Westminster line near Bellows Falls. And if I can do this here. So as you can see, the tubes we have over the road has a lot of pitch to it and a lot of wheel track depressions here. So we tend to have to tape it down using mastic tape to keep those tubes level. So rough roads and heavy truck traffic can be problematic. Also, we found out putting them out in hot weather can be difficult. So anything about 85 or 90 degrees or more can be pretty challenging. The asphalt actually can get pretty soft and the tubes can melt into them. Same thing in mud season, that can be problematic too. But anything outside of downtown with roads that don't get a ton of traffic, so which is most of our roads other than a lot of the state highways, we can get some pretty good data with it. Wide roads can also be a little bit challenging. This is Western Avenue right in Brattleboro before they put the new bike lanes on. Maybe kind of hard to see, but in this case, we've had to put the bike tubes on just one of the lanes so we can get half the data, multiply it by 2. Our tubes aren't quite long enough for big wide roads, but we can get counts on using one lane and then double it that way. How accurate our bike tube counters? They're actually quite good. We did a test out on Upper Dummerston Road in Brattleboro a couple of years ago, put out all of our bicycle counters. 26 bikes went over the counters in the course of 3 days. And other than one time when 2 bikes were side by side hitting the tubes at the same time, both counters picked up every bike. The traffic counter didn't pick up one cargo bike because it has a longer wheelbase, but we can say with pretty good confidence that it's 100% accurate for traditional bikes that are in single file. So we feel pretty confident about our bicycle count data. Our pedestrian count data, we use these passive infrared scanners. So a person walks by them and the scanner is tripped from the heat from the person walking past them. We use these for short-term counts, 2, 3, 4 weeks, but we can also use them for long-term counts. We can leave them up there for months on end. They provide an hourly breakdown of data just like the bicycle counters do, but they don't give us information on direction. And while we call them pedestrian counters and while we use them for pedestrian counts, they're going to pick up anybody passing the counter. So cyclists on a trail like the West River Trail shown here are also going to get picked up. So on multi-use pathways, our quote unquote pedestrian counts will also include cyclists. To try to get an idea of bikes versus pedestrian use, we can put out our bike tube counters and our pedestrian counters at the same time. This is a photo in the Valley Trail in Dover. So here's our quote unquote pedestrian counter that's picking up all users. And then we have our bike tube counters on there. So simple subtraction can give us total use, pedestrian use, and bicycle use in this case. Some considerations about the pedestrian counter. We need to put them in a place where we can isolate people from the cars. So this picture here of West Main Street in Wilmington, there's really no way to put our peg counter out there. So we're just looking at the sidewalk. In this case, our pedestrian counter isn't going to work. So we can use them in most situations other than downtown. Sidewalks can be a little tricky. We need to put them where people walk past them and are not likely to congregate. And they have a range of about 20 feet or so. So really wide trails aren't necessarily going to work. How accurate are they? I didn't say quite good. I'm going to say pretty good. We think they work quite well on trails, again, where people are just walking past them, not congregating. They can be a little challenging to use in downtown settings, like on Main Street here in Brattleboro, where people are milling about and walking side by side. But again, we don't think that the error that we get from that is anything significant. Besides the equipment that we use, we can also do manual counts. So we can just simply put people in the field. That can be time consuming. So we also have a video recorder that we have purchased. And the one great thing about the manual counts is, unlike the equipment, there's a possibility for 100% accuracy. So there's no equipment failure. We're able to see people walking side by side. We're able to account for people milling about. They're also good because you can get some anecdotal information too that your pedestrian and bike counter aren't going to give you. So are those bikes that are on the Westover Trail, are they adults, or are we seeing a lot of families? Are the people that are on the Valley Trail in Dover, are they just walking, or are we seeing strollers on the trail as well? So you can get some good benefits by doing manual counts and using the video recorder. They work well for more complex sites like crosswalk counts that we do where we can't isolate the people from cars. So it's a great tool, but it's time consuming, and we can only do them for a couple of days because it takes so long to process the data. For the video counters, we tend to look at them at 6 or 8 times the normal speed. And so it takes 10 minutes or so to process an hour's worth of data. So if you have a day's worth of data on your video camera, that can be 2 to 3 hours worth of processing. So it is a bit time consuming. This is an example of, we did a manual count at Canal Street and South Main Street a few years ago in Brattleboro, looking at crosswalk use at this intersection. There's no way we could have collected this data using our pedestrian counters, just because, again, impossible to isolate cars from people. So we had staff out there in 2-hour blocks, and we're not only able to get information on how many people used the crosswalk, but the direction that they were coming from and where they were going to. Another example of a crosswalk study we did in Bellows Falls. We had the video camera on the corner of Atkinson and School Street there, looking primarily at people who are students who are walking to elementary school. And with one video camera, we're able to get information on the use of all 4 of the crosswalks there. This is a picture of the video camera that we have mounted up in Newfane, where we were doing a crosswalk study there. And just an example of what the video looks like. And again, we'll have somebody here look at it at 6 or 8 times the actual speed there and do our counts of pedestrians this way. That's a little bit about our equipment. How do we go through and organize the counts? How do we analyze and present the data? And through this, I really want to reinforce that what we're getting is a general idea of bicycle use and pedestrian use. Exact numbers aren't super important. Whether you have 50 people or 52 people on your trail in any one count day is probably less important than you're having 20 people versus 50 people versus 100 people. Or 5 years ago, there were 50 people on the trail, and now we're getting 80 people on the trail. So those little discrepancies we get with people walking side by side or congregating next to the counter, they can be a minor issue, but if you're looking at data comparing it from year to year to year, I think we're still going to get good information on trends and on general idea of use. So for bicycle counts, we do them on 3 different site types. We do them on roads, state and town highways. We do them on multi-use pathways. So by this, we're talking about improved surface pathways like the Westover Trail in Brattleboro or Londonderry, Valley Trail in Dover, those types of things where you have a improved crushed stone or paved surface. And we do those on regular trails. Our pedestrian count sites, we do those on crosswalks. We do that, which we use the term street crossings, because sometimes we're counting people crossing the street because there's no crosswalk there yet, the purpose of our study. We do them on sidewalks, again, on multi-use pathways and on trails. When you're looking at the data and we're setting up the counters and planning for our counts, it's important to realize that use patterns are different between cyclists and pedestrians. And the use patterns are also different in places like sidewalks versus recreational trails. So if it's raining out, I'm still walking to work on the sidewalk in Brattleboro, but I may not be going for a bike ride on the Westover Trail after work if it's raining. So we tend to get much more variability in bicycle use than we do in pedestrian use, because people are just less likely to ride their bikes in the rain, and they're less likely to ride their bikes for hours after the rain while the streets and the trails are still wet. You also get a lot of variability weekend versus weekday on certain trails and pathways. So because of this, in general, we try to get at least 2 weeks worth of data and make sure that we include 2 full weekends. If we can get 3 or 4 weeks, that's even better. Show you an example of some data we collected on the Haystack Mountain Trail in Wilmington. And this is just a recreational trail, hiking trail to the summit of Haystack Mountain. The weekends are in darker orange and the weekday counts are in lighter orange. And as you can see here, we had 2.5 inches of rain over the course of a day and a half, and virtually nobody was on the trail on the Friday before April 10th, 2024. But during the weekend, we got 160 hits on the counter and over 180 on the counter the following day. And then we're back here during the weekday and much less use on the trail. So in this case, the trail that gets a lot of visitors, maybe some locals, but probably more visitors to the area, a lot more use on the weekends than on the weekdays. So that's why we're collecting at least, hopefully, 2 full weekends worth of data here. So the terminology that we use, we tend to use the term hit when we're talking about raw data on the counter. So if somebody passes our counter, we call that a hit on the counter. When we take the data and process it and give you an average of the use, we tend to use the term trip. And a trip is one person passing the counter in one direction. And so we'll talk about average trips per day on a trail. And it's very important to remember that we're providing data on trips, not on people. So a trail like the Haystack Mountain Trail, which goes up to the summit and then comes back down, it's basically an out and back trail. We may have 100 hits on the counter, which signifies that there's 100 trips on that trail, one person passing the counter in one direction. But in most cases, a person is passing the counter twice, as they're hiking up the mountain and as they're coming back. So a lot of these numbers, it's important to remember that we see the data for, again, 34 trips per day on the West River Trail. That's not 34 people. It's 34 people passing the counter, but there may be only half that, 17 people. There are actually 17 individuals who are on that trail on any one day. So that's a really important thing to remember. Trips per day can tell you how busy the trail is, what the use is, whereas trying to convert that to the number of people who are on the trail, gives you an idea of the benefit of that trail and perhaps the economic impact of the users. So our data that we provide gives average trips per day, but then we also break it down into average trips for weekend days versus weekdays. We'll also include notes in general on the weather. So if it's a particularly, rainy period or hot or very cold period, we'll put that information in there. And sometimes we'll put information on the busiest day of our count period, because an average is just that, average, but some days are much higher than the average. The information that we provide is just these summaries of the entire count period. We're totally happy to provide raw data if people want it, so you can look at day by day or hour by hour. We have tons of Excel spreadsheets of all this data. We're happy to provide if somebody wants to dig into the data further. When you're looking at those numbers, it's important to remember, weather conditions can change use. So if we're looking at trail data year after year after year, and one year was 2 or 3 weeks of really great weather, and the following year was a lot of rainy days, use on that trail may be down, and it may not be indicative of use over the entire year. So you got to look at the weather and consider that. There's a lot of seasonal variability on our recreation paths, much less so in sidewalks and downtown settings where I'm going to work winter and summer, but I'm not riding my bike in the winter typically. Holidays or special events can also skew the data. So what's our data products look like? Here's an example of the Hoot, Toot, and Whistle Trail out in Wilmington. So we have years that we've collected the data. We have the count dates. And years ago, we would do them for about a week, but we're trying to do them for 2 or 3 weeks. We have information on the average trips per day. And again, a trip is one person passing the counter in one direction. So we also break it down by weekday versus weekend day. And it's kind of interesting here. There's some variability on some of the count years where there's a lot more weekend use. Other times it's more even. And we have information on the weather and peak counts. So in this case, in 2024, average trips per day were 41, but on one of the days we got 107 on there. Our bicycle count summaries look like this. Because bike use is more impacted by the weather. We've got a whole chart here on the weather, so you can pick out the rainy days versus the cloudy days and versus the sunny days, hot days versus cooler days. And then we've also put together on their charts looking at how many hits we get on an hourly basis. So you can see where the use is, in this case on Handle Road, over the course of an entire day. We have just recently put up brand new online web maps for both bike counts and pedestrian counts. So this is one way to access the data. Here's the link down here. We'll put that in the chat. And I can give you just a quick demonstration. If you put that link into your browser, you come into our online mapping page. There are links here for both bicycle counts and pedestrian counts. If you click on the online map, you get a map of the region. You can just kind of, zoom in, click on a point. It's going to give you information about that, in which case this is the Valley Trail South near Kingswood Road. We have information on the year that the count was done, the month, the day that we started, the number of days that the count was done for, average daily traffic, and then weekday versus weekend traffic. This actually was an old counter that wasn't picking up bicycles here. So that's why we have that. In this case, this may omit bikes, but we have newer counters that definitely do bicycles and the general location of the trail. You can also go through over here and you can filter by the year, because we have lots of years of data, lots of data points for some of these. You can filter by town. So we're in Dover. We can just zoom into the town of Dover itself, understanding that some of the data points are kind of hidden by the filters. You can filter by site type, all sorts of stuff on here. So just a quick demo of what our online maps look like. We'll give you that. So let's look at the data a little bit more closely. Here's one of our summary sheets for a bicycle count on the Maple Gray Walkway in Putney. And this is the concrete sidewalk in the village, which turns into an asphalt pathway going out to Putney Central School. And so, you might wonder, are people using the pathway to bike to school? If you just look at the data here, average trips per day, average of 11, that doesn't tell us a whole heck of a lot. Looking at the weekday versus the weekend day breakdown, this is really interesting because there's many more people using the trail during the week than there is on the weekends. And usually it's either about the same or there's a lot more weekend use. So let's go to the second page and look at our total hits on the counter by hour. And so this is for the weekdays. Really interesting. There's a lot of use in the 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock hour, not much midday, and then a lot of use again here in the 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 4 o'clock hour. Compare that to weekend use, which is a much different looking chart here. And so my guess is if there's a lot of traffic on the Maple Gray Walkway early in the morning and then after school hours, that people are probably using it to bike to school. We can even look further at the data because we have directional data to see, are they going in the direction to school in the morning and from school in the afternoon. But another example, we can look at pre versus post-COVID use of our trails. Again, back to the Haystack Mountain Trail in Wilmington. So these are counts from August. We have, about 60 trips per day pre-COVID. 2020, we have more than double that in August of 2020. Use since COVID has declined a little bit, but it's still remained higher than pre-COVID levels. Some information on, I'm just going to show you just a number of different charts that we've done. Downtown Brattleboro sidewalk counts over the years. As you can see, there's some variability here due to the seasons, but obviously a big dip from about 1,000 trips per day downtown pre-COVID versus less than 200 per day in May of 2020. It's recovered to basically about the same, but there are some months that are a little bit lower than pre-COVID. Another example here, this was in November of 2020, and you just kind of see some interesting patterns here. And dark bars are weekend days, and the lighter orange bars are weekdays. Here's the count for Thanksgiving. It is the lowest traffic day of any day during our count period. But interestingly enough, the following day, Friday, which was a weekday, is the highest weekday of the entire count period, the day after Thanksgiving. And it's actually higher than any weekend day, except for back here, November 7th. So again, you can see really interesting patterns as you dive into the data some more. West River Trail, again, one of our most popular multi-use pathways in the region. We have a lot of data here initially, pre-COVID, and then all of a sudden, it just, April and May of 2020, it just skyrockets. So more than doubled the use. In this case, for the most part, that sort of post-COVID use has stayed about the same, even gone up a little bit. So one thing you can see on this chart, though, is there is a good degree of seasonal variability on the trail that we didn't see on the downtown Brattleboro count as much, because again, people are walking in downtown Brattleboro winter or summer, but there's just a lot less use in the West River Trail during the winter because it's cold, it's icy, and you're not going out after work because it's dark. Bicycle use, it obviously went up during COVID. It's gone down a little bit. We haven't done a lot of bike counts on the West River Trail. We certainly want to do more, but the bicycle use doesn't seem to follow the same trend of a doubling and staying at the same level, but it certainly is still more than pre-COVID. You can look at cool things like holidays. The dark bars are Thanksgiving on this map, and the lighter bars is a Friday after Thanksgiving. And so are people going out and walking off their turkey? Well, 2020 was not just COVID, but 2020 was also poor weather on Thanksgiving Day. So much fewer people on that day. Same thing with 2024. So, and you can look at some things. We got, data on Christmas time. 2020 and 2021 were both storms on Christmas Day. So very few people are walking out there on Christmas Day. Christmas Eve was nicer weather, the lighter green bar, so there's more people out that day. We've even done things, backcountry ski areas. This is interesting out in Dutch Hill and Reedsboro. We were able to get together weather data and see when people are using the ski areas. It was a pretty bleak early January. Tons of snow happened Martin Luther King weekend, but interestingly, there wasn't a whole lot of people skiing out there until the following weekend when it really skyrocketed. And then we had another big storm here just after the last weekend in January. And interestingly, not a lot of use during the week. So backcountry skiers love fresh snow, and this graph shows you that there's still opportunities to get fresh snow because a lot of people wait till the weekend to get out there. And actually, the count showed that we're oftentimes not up there until about the 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock hours. So if you can go during the week or go early in the morning, got a chance of getting some great snow. So that's my portion of the presentation, just kind of a quick overview of the type of data that Windham Regional Commission collects and some of the things that you can do with the data. I'm going to turn it over here to Drew. And just to introduce Drew, I first didn't really meet Drew, but became aware of Drew at a Vermont Community Development Conference quite a few years ago up in Burke. And he was one of the last speakers on there. He was talking about, I think, I don't know, trails and economic development and trail-friendly communities. And I sat there and just went, wow, it totally changed my view of how trails and towns and communities work together. And I've heard him speak several times since on trail council and economic development. So just really psyched to have him come here and talk. So again, he's a owner and founder of CRO Planning and Design. They're a firm up in Burlington that does a lot of recreation work. And I'm psyched to not only listen to him present, but I'm also working with him. He's working with the town of Grafton on a project up there for a VORAC grant that the town received. So, Drew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, and I see we have Dave and Al from Grafton on the call, so that's great. Good to see y'all. Um, I think folks are maybe seeing my screen now, or are y'all seeing a presentation? Awesome. Um, I will go into my portion here. I'll give you just a 1 minute introduction on CRO. Thank you very much, Jeff, for that introduction. That's much better than probably I'll do. Um, I'll talk a little bit about what we'll learn, some economic impact 101. I'll share some data from some national and Vermont studies that have been done, and then share some tools and resources that you all could use if you want to try and think about some economic impacts on your own. Um, so to get right into it, CRO stands for Communities, Recreation, and Open Space, and that's what we focus on. Um, the company was founded in August of 2023, so we've been around for a little while, but I've been working in this space for over 20 years with my previous employer, SE Group, and I worked in New York State and Colorado. But we have team members here in Vermont and in Minnesota and in Washington State in the Pacific Northwest. And this is the type of things we do is recreation, data analysis, and design. So for this part of the presentation, we want to just familiarize you all with the idea of economic impact analysis, how you can connect these trail counting activities that you can work with Jeff on with economic impact, share some simple data and tools that you could use to do some of your own analysis if you're so inclined, and then share some completed and some soon to be completed economic impact analyses here in Vermont. Um, so economic impacts are becoming an increasingly common way to advocate for outdoor recreation. Folks have started to use these sorts of analyses to bring more people into the tent, I like to say, of outdoor rec. And so this might be a select board member who's maybe not going out on the trails as frequently as some of us on this call, but maybe is really thinking about economic development and supporting local businesses and in the community. And so this way we can bring folks together who maybe aren't already supporters of trails or sidewalks and active transportation. Um, Also, it's a key theme at the statewide level for a lot of our grant programs. The Move Forward Together Vermont initiative was just completed, and that kind of guides a lot of the funding for our grant programs. And I'll just give a quick plug to take a look at that. That website is now available, and I'll share a link here in the chat. Um, but one of their major themes is economic development. And so if you can show that you're thinking about economic impact and economic development with your trail or recreation project, that will make any of your grant applications for the Recreational Trails Program, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or the VORAC grants, almost any grant, more competitive. So that's kind of be another great reason to do some of this thinking. Um, so what is economic impact? And what do you need to do it? First, we'll start with the three primary inputs. The first thing we need is an estimate of the total trail traffic. It's really important that Jeff mentioned trips versus traffic. We would want to make an assumption of if there was in and out and kind of divide by two. Often we might be dividing by something less than two. Sometimes we're thinking it's like we're taking about 40% of them as out and back, because maybe 10 of them went one direction, didn't come back the other. But we'll try to come up with an estimate of trail traffic. Then we need an estimate for the type of trail user. This is really important because a local day user is going to spend a lot less money than someone who's coming and staying overnight. And so the local day user is about $13. That includes maybe something at the country store. It can involve a beer or a sandwich. Maybe you're not doing that every time, and so it averages out to that. I know For my kids, it's definitely ice cream. If we're going out for a hike or a bike ride, we're definitely getting ice cream at the end. And so that's where my $13 is going. But that's kind of the local day user. But an overnight user is going to spend a lot more money. And so we want to have an estimate of how many of those people that came through our trail counter are these different types of users. And the last thing that you need is how much do those users spend on average? What's the average visitor spending by these trail user types? Um, so you can run this through some fancy economic impact models. And so if you're a big nerd for this stuff, like me, you'll like to do that. The in-plan model is a pay to play, and they keep raising the prices. It's incredibly expensive, honestly. But it is really robust and gives you some really powerful ability to analyze with a lot of rich detail. The MGM2 model is a free model developed by the National Park Service. That's more of it's an Excel spreadsheet. It works very similarly to InPlan, but is a little bit more simple in the data, and it's not specific to your state or your zip code. It's more averaged across rural communities, suburban communities, and urban communities. And so the data is a little bit less specific, but it's free and kind of does a lot of the same things. These models model direct impacts, which are kind of the amount that those folks that are out on the trail spend. That's a direct impact, me buying that ice cream. The indirect impact would be the ice cream shop being able to buy paper cups and spoons and little maple candy to sprinkle on the top of my ice cream, because that's what I'm going to get on my maple creamy, has little maple pieces. And so that's the indirect impact, is them buying that. So it's impacting maple producers and paper cup producers. And then the induced impacts are the pay that would go to that person who's scooping the ice cream. They are then able to spend money in Vermont. And so that's the induced impact. Really importantly, most of an economic impact model is the direct impact. That's over 80% of the things that we're finding in these big fancy models. And you can do the direct impact with really simple math. From those fancy models, though, you're getting more rich data. And so you're getting not just sales, how much do people spend, but they also model how many jobs does that equate to in the economy. And it'll tell you even which sectors those jobs are in. Some of them are in things like manufacturing, like paper cups, but a lot of them are in things like hospitality, restaurants and bars, or lodging. Importantly, those models report things called full-time equivalents, or FTEs, and that's usually meaning it supports 0.1 jobs at that local bar, and it supports 0.2 jobs at another local sandwich shop. And so usually, even if it says 3.2 jobs, that doesn't mean it's 3 people's whole job is now supported by the trail activity, but it's many people's fraction of a job that equivalates to a full job in the local community. And so it might be several parts of people's jobs at different businesses, but the models will report it as these full-time equivalents. And they also model tax impacts. So it's also related to that spending at a local, state, and federal level. I guess I already went through this a little bit, but the direct impacts, the indirect impacts, and the induced impacts, those more robust models kind of produce these 3 different levels of impact. But back to my argument that this is just simple math, is the direct impacts really are. If you have an estimate from Jeff that 200 people came out on Christmas Day, and you have an estimate of the type of user those 200 people were, and I can give you some good assumptions for that. But just for ease, let's say 50% of them are local day users and 25% of them are each of these type non-local day users and overnight users. It's just simple math. 200 people came and half of them are local day users. Then we have 100 local day users. And if we know they spend $13.12 on average, we multiply that 100 times $13.12, and that's your direct impact. And that's the same. So it's kind of the simple math that you can use to get the direct impact. It doesn't tell you jobs, it doesn't tell you anything about tax impacts or those other types of induced or indirect, but it tells you it's at least this much. It's a very conservative estimate, but usually that's most of the impact that the models are generating as well. Um, Here are some assumptions that you could use if you wanted to try this math. This is for a tourism or destination-oriented trail system. This is from the Green Mountain National Forest. They did a lot of survey work across all the forest visitors over the years, and these are kind of the estimates that they've compiled in their system. It's called the National Visitor Use Monitoring System. But since they've done a lot of work in that space, it can be a handy number, and I think they're good assumptions for something that's like a Green Mountain National Forest asset, something that's a little bit more tourism or destination focused. Those have about 66% of local day users. Still, the majority of people using those assets are right around the local area by the forest. That maybe is not that town, but maybe the 3 towns surrounding the local, right in the local area. A non-local day user would be someone like myself from Burlington, driving just for the day to come down towards southern Vermont and use the Sherburner Trail on the National Forest. So there you have 11% of those. And then on the National Forest, you get 23% of non-overnight or non-local overnight folks. Those people are staying overnight. And that's a good estimate for tourism-oriented systems. For a locally serving system, these are things you might have in your town forest, something in the village center. This is Vermont, where we do have a lot of tourism and second homeowners. So even these locally serving systems usually will have some non-local use, but I'd recommend looking at something about 15% non-local use, and maybe 10% non-local day users and 5% non-local overnight users. And that would track with some of the Vermont tourism data that we've looked at in some other studies. That can be a really good estimate. These here are estimates that you could use for trail user spending. What these numbers are actually from the state of Vermont, from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and they are your average Vermont tourist spending numbers. This is not specific to trails or specific to outdoor recreation, but in my experience, we've done a lot of trail spending surveys where we have gone out and asked people that. And sometimes we've gotten lots of responses and we felt really good about it. Like in the Mad River Valley, we got over 200 responses to that survey and felt really good about the data. Some other ones we didn't get quite as much. We got like 30 responses and we felt like we're not sure we could use this. In all cases, they were really close to the Vermont average tourist spending. And we feel like it's good to use those statewide average tourist spending numbers because the average Vermont tourist is pretty similar to your average Vermont trail user. And so that's why a lot of our tourists are coming. Importantly, those are just for these non-local users. The local day user number, that's from spending studies that we've done. That's not from the state, the local day user number. But the non-local user, the tourist number for trail users is pretty similar to the regular number for Vermont tourists in general. So we would recommend using those. And like I said, just kind of showing some numbers in here of how it can be the simple math. If you get that total trail traffic, you can use it as a tourism-oriented system. You just say 66% of them were local day users, 11% were non-local, and 23% were overnight visitors. I give you that number for each one of them. You can just do some simple math to get that total direct impact and start to have a conversation with the select board about it, for example. Just to make sure we get through all the data with some time for some questions, I'll fly through some of this as well. Starting with the national numbers, this is something that Senator Welch actually led, I was really glad that he was one of the co-sponsors of this early on, but getting the federal government to start tracking the economics of outdoor recreation the way they were tracking a lot of other industries, we see that was really big. 2.3% of the GDP nationally is in outdoor recreation spending. That includes things like RVs and outdoor gardening and things like that. So it's a pretty generous definition of outdoor recreation, but it does include a lot of things. Really importantly, on the national level, Vermont is ranked number 2 for the percent of our GDP that's related to outdoor recreation. We're second only to Hawaii. And so if you look at total GDP, it's like hard to compete with California. They're gigantic, their GDP is gigantic, and their outdoor recreation GDP is big because it's a big state. But it doesn't mean that much to them. It's a relatively small part of their overall GDP, even though it's $81.5 billion. Ours is only $2.1 billion, but it is so much more important to our local economy or to our state economy because it's a much bigger percent of our GDP. So the national numbers kind of speak to how important that is to our local economies here in Vermont. And that's the number for Vermont is that from the federal government that outdoor recreation generates $2.1 billion in economic activity. It creates 16,283 jobs. It's a very specific number that they estimate. And that's 5.1% of all the employees in the state. Statewide, that includes skiing is the number 1. That's the snow activities. That also includes snowmobiling and some of the other winter sports. So that encompasses quite a bit. RVing is number 2 in terms of economic impact. Boating and fishing, particularly Lake Champlain and a lot of the lakes that we have. Climbing, hiking, and tent camping, and then some of the hunting showing up as number 5. Now we'll share some economic impact numbers that were based from trail counts. This is a study I did with my previous employer, SE Group, in the Northeast Kingdom. This is with the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, and it's really focused on Caledonia County in specific, so only a third of the visitation and economic impact of the Lamoille, because it's stretches all the way across northern Vermont. This study included a market assessment where it was looking at some national tourism. It looked at a visitation analysis that was looking at current use with kind of some of the trail counting, like Jeff has been doing, but also looked at estimating future use based on some different development scenarios along the trail. And so if the communities along the trail were able to develop more trailheads and parks, more lodging and campgrounds, we estimated different levels of use and economic impact associated with them. And then we gave some case studies on what other long distance trails have done to kind of develop tourism infrastructure around them, including the Petite Train du Nord, which is just above us here in Quebec. If anybody's looking for a rail trail to ride like that, I highly recommend it. It's really beautiful and fun. The economic impact for the Lamoille, we see similar numbers for those average spends. And I think we actually did use those numbers for the average spends for this analysis. So that's what you're seeing. But you can see kind of how they, the categories that they spent in. And really importantly, that 66% of the spending comes from overnight visitors, even though a much fewer percentage of the visitors are overnight users. And you almost always see that is that they spend so much more overnight visitors. So if you can increase overnight visitation by just a few percent, you will increase your total economic impact by a lot. And so that's the area you want to grow the most. And what we looked at were these 3 different scenarios of trail investment and how much trail promotion they were doing, creating new maps and informational resources with websites for the trail. If there was regional promotion and coordination, if they're building trailheads and parks, and if they're developing, lodging, camping. And then kind of the number is like how much they're doing that. And so in the significant growth scenario, they're investing in everything and quite a bit. And so we're kind of showing if just by finishing the Lamoille and by promoting the trail a little bit, they could get 10% increase in trail use over current conditions. And this is right as the trail is being opened. Folks may have heard about the floods over the past 2 years, so it's been slowly opening over the past 2 years, but this study was done right before the floods in 2023. And so if they are in that moderate scenario, we're thinking that they could grow overnight and non-local day visitors a little bit more. And then in the significant growth scenario, that's where you have the opportunity to grow that non-local visitation the most. And some of the impacts from that, at the baseline growth scenario, even just in Caledonia County, the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail produces almost $4 million in total economic impact, and that's probably what it's doing today, considering this was done 2 years ago and thinking that those baseline growth things have been accomplished. That supports 63 of these full-time equivalent jobs and all throughout Caledonia County. And over time, and especially with the tourism development, that could really grow to even more jobs and even more economic activity. I'm going to share a study that we just did with Tennessee State Parks. This one is really focused on adaptive mountain biking and adding tourism-oriented mountain bike trails and adaptive hiking and mountain biking. A quick note about Tennessee State Parks is that it's free to enter any Tennessee State Parks, which is different than our Vermont ones, but they have things like hotels, lodges, and restaurants, things like that. So they have revenue generation in Tennessee State Parks. So that's how they're kind of funding a lot of their parks, is not with entry fees, but with these revenue generating opportunities. And they were starting to think about what was the fiscal and economic impact of adding mountain bike trails and mountain bike systems to their state parks. And so we started to model that. And kind of looking at what would make an offering that would be kind of tourism oriented. They also mentioned that they were working on this initiative called Access 2030 to make all of those hotels and campsites, lodges and pools and these trails ADA accessible, and these trail systems, not necessarily ADA, but supporting adaptive hiking and adaptive mountain biking. And so we decided to model that as well, and it quickly overshadowed the mountain bike economic impact, which was not something we knew going into the study. So that was kind of exciting. We also found out that there isn't a lot of data around adaptive recreation and economic impact kind of through this work. Importantly, there are different types of accessible and adaptive experiences that people would like to have, just like all other trail users. People using adaptive equipment sometimes want to be on that graded rail trail type ADA accessible trail. Sometimes they want to have a little bit more challenge. They want to be a little bit more remote, but they don't want to be mountain biking. They want to be hiking. So that's where you might be on adaptive hiking trail. That's a trail that is not designed like for mountain bikes with kind of some of the fun turns and swoops, but it's narrower and would allow for an off-road wheelchair. And so that's a different type of experience than you can get on an ADA trail. And that might be what an adaptive hiking trail would look like. And then adaptive mountain biking trail would also accommodate hand cycles and off-road wheelchairs. But that's going to give you more of a mountain bike experience with some of those rolling features and some of the fun experiences that you could have in a mountain bike. And so noting in this study that there's a need there to produce all three different types of experiences in those trails. And we studied Fall Creek Falls State Park, which is one of their busiest state parks, but it's really in a rural area. So not a lot of local population around it, but people travel to it. And like I mentioned, their adaptive recreation quickly overshadowed the economic impact of mountain biking. Mountain biking showed up at about 5 million, whereas adaptive recreation showed up at over 20 million. We also found that every single one of these systems would bring financial benefit to Tennessee State Parks. So I'm noticing we're really close on time. So I'll just skip over some of those slides. I'll mention that there are several studies currently underway that we're working on for the BB Spur Rail Trail up in northern Vermont. With WADA and Stowe Trails Partnership, we're starting to kick off an economic impact study with them. With Crag, Vermont, we've been talking with some board members about a study there. We're in the middle of a study of Vermont Adaptive, which will get really good data for economic impact of adaptive recreation here in Vermont. And that will be kind of a first of its kind study. So that data, we're just crunching the data from the winter programs now, and that will be coming out in a few months. And then we may have some worksheets kind of based on this presentation that Jeff and I were talking about that could kind of help do economic impact. And so we just started talking about that today, but we may be underway with that shortly. I'll just share with you, this is a volunteer trail counting form. I'll put a link to the chat. It's part of the Vermont Town Forest system. And you can use that to get observational counts from volunteers, kind of like Jeff was mentioning. You have to get 6 hours of volunteer time on 3 different counts to get that data. But it's a system that you can use to get trail count data. And I'll also share a link to this trail spending survey template that we have. And with that, I just want to open up to questions. I know I can stick on for a few minutes after the hour here, but just want to make sure we have some time for questions for folks. Sorry, I talked really fast. There's a lot of information.
Hey, Drew, there was a question in the chat. Joanne asked about how you're defining local user versus non-local user. So what's your definition of local versus non-local?
Yeah, it will really depend on the trail system. And kind of, for example, in the Moyle Valley Rail Trail, it stretches across 3 counties. And so in that case, a local user would be somebody living, I think we said in that case, 20 miles from the trail. But they could be living anywhere along the trail corridor and be a local user. If it's more of an individual trail system in your town forest or something that's not stretching across 3 counties, that can also be a good metric, 20 miles, or you can use your town as a good boundary, or some zip codes can be really handy as a setting the boundary. But usually we'd say it's about 20 miles for the local user, and the non-local day user is somebody coming from more than 20 miles typically to use the trails. If you're in the Northeast Kingdom, though, local use is probably more than 20 miles. It's probably more like 30 or 40. It depends on where you are and kind of what folks think about as their local recreation. And so you might think about that, but it's somewhere probably between 20 and 40 miles usually. Are there any other questions from folks? Feel free to pop off mute or chat, type in the chat.
Right. Sounds like we've covered it. And yeah, if you have, most of you have my email, and if you have a question for Drew, I can certainly pass it on to him, or you saw his email on the screen as well. So I guess with that, thank you all for coming. If you were on if you joined later and didn't put your name and affiliation in the chat, we'd appreciate doing that. And other than that, have a great day and thanks for attending.
Yeah, my email's in there. If you have any questions or want me to email any of these resources, please reach out. I'd love to chat.